Imagine standing on an open plain in the south of England, wind cutting across the grass, the sky pressing heavy and gray above you. And there, rising from the earth, ancient, silent, impossible, are the stones. No mortar, no machinery, no explanation that's ever fully satisfied anyone. For thousands of years, people have looked at Stonehenge and asked the same question: who or what put them there? The answers they came up with ranged from a grieving king and a sorcerer to giants to the devil himself. And the strangest part, some of those answers aren't entirely wrong. Welcome back to Golden Cattle Media, where folklore, history, and legend intertwine. If you enjoy stories of ancient mysteries, forgotten myths, and the strange overlap between the two, consider subscribing. There's always another story waiting. Our story begins in Salisbury Plain in Wiltshire, England, a wide open stretch of chalk grassland that has been considered sacred ground for nearly 5,000 years. The monument itself is immediately striking, a ring of massive sarsen stones, some standing up to 28 feet tall, arranged with a precision that still baffles engineers today. The smaller stones, known as blue stones, were brought from the Preseli Hills in Wales over 200 miles away, and are believed by many researchers to have been prized specifically for their supposed healing properties. But long before modern archaeology began piecing together Stonehenge's true history, ordinary people were already writing their own explanations, and those explanations, as we'll see, tell us just as much about the human need for meaning as they do about the stones themselves. The oldest written folklore about Stonehenge comes from a 12th century cleric named Geoffrey of Monmouth. In his Historia Regum Britanniae, written around 1136 AD, Geoffrey claimed that the monument was the work of none other than Merlin, the wizard of Arthurian legend. According to this account, hundreds of British noblemen had been treacherously slaughtered by the Saxon leader Hengest at what Geoffrey calls the Night of the Long Knives. King Aurelius Ambrosius, grief-stricken and determined to honor the dead, commissioned Merlin to build them an eternal memorial. Merlin's solution was to steal a stone circle from Ireland, one called the Giant's Dance, and magically transport it to Salisbury Plain, where it was reassembled as a monument to the fallen. What's striking about this legend is that it gave Stonehenge a funerary commemorative purpose, and modern archaeology has actually supported the idea, at least in that part. The site was used for burials across multiple periods of its long history. But Merlin wasn't working with just any stones. According to Geoffrey, those stones had originally been carried to Ireland from Africa by giants, who prized them for their miraculous healing properties, which brings us to the second legend. The name Geoffrey used for Stonehenge, Horia Gigantum, or the Giant's Dance, reflected a widespread medieval belief that the monument had been built by giants. And honestly, standing beside those stones, it's not hard to see why ordinary people reached that conclusion. The largest sarsens weigh around 25 tons. Transporting them from Marlborough Downs, roughly 25 miles away, without modern equipment would have been an extraordinary feat. To medieval minds, the simplest explanation was that only beings of supernatural size could have done it. There was also a darker version of this story. Some local traditions held that the stones themselves had once been giants, turned to stone as divine punishment for dancing on the Sabbath, frozen mid-movement as the rising sun caught them at dawn. Not all of folklore was heroic. One of the most popular English legends about Stonehenge casts a much less sympathetic figure at its center, the devil. In this version of the story, the devil purchased the stones from an old woman in Ireland, wrapped them up, and flew them across the sea to Salisbury Plain under cover of darkness. But as he was setting down the last stone, a nearby friar spotted him. Startled, the devil hurled the stone at the friar, striking him on the heel. That stone, according to legend, became the heel stone, the great standing stone just outside the main circle along the axis of the midsummer sunrise. Now, etymologists are quick to point out that the name heel stone likely comes from the Old English word for sun, rather than any tale about a friar's foot. The legend stuck, and it tells us something important. Stonehenge was so strange, so inexplicable, that the only force powerful enough to explain it in a Christian medieval mind was the devil himself. From the 17th century onward, a new theory began to take hold, and this one came not from folk storytellers, but from educated antiquarians. The idea was this: Stonehenge was a Druid temple. The men most responsible for cementing this association were John Aubrey, who surveyed the site in the 1600s, and William Stukeley, who mapped it out extensively in the 1720s. Stukeley in particular became so captivated by the idea of Druidic ritual, he imagined sun worship, seasonal ceremonies, and possible human sacrifice conducted within the stone circle, that he eventually adopted the persona of a Druid himself, taking the name Hindanax. There's just one problem. Modern archaeology has established beyond reasonable doubt that Stonehenge predates the Celtic Druids by roughly 2,000 years. The monument was already ancient history by the time the first Druids walked the British Isles. The stones were raised around 2500 BC. The Druids emerged in historical record from around the Iron Age. And yet, the association never died. In fact, it gave birth to the modern Druid revival, a living spiritual movement whose members still gather at Stonehenge every year for the summer solstice, just as Stukeley imagined their ancient predecessors did once. Alongside the grand myths, Stonehenge has also accumulated quieter, stranger bits of local folklore. For centuries, people believed the stones possessed healing powers. Water poured over them and collected could cure illness when drunk or bathed in. This belief echoes Geoffrey of Monmouth's original claim about the stone's medicinal properties, and it mirrors the archaeological evidence for why the blue stones may have been transported all the way from Wales in the first place. Then there was the counting problem. Local tradition held that it was impossible to accurately count the stones. Every attempt would yield a different number. Bakers would lay loaves of bread on each stone to keep track, and still come up with contradictory totals. This was taken as proof of enchantment. The stones didn't want to be counted. Perhaps the most enduring piece of living folklore isn't a legend at all. It's a fact. Stonehenge is a line so that on the longest day of the year, the midsummer sunrise shines directly along the central axis of the monument through the great Trithyllian arch and strikes the altar stone at the center of the circle. Whether this was the deliberate intention of its builders remains a matter of debate, but the effect is undeniable. Interestingly, recent research suggests that the midwinter sun may have been even more significant to the original builders. The evidence points to Stonehenge as a place of winter gathering, of feasting, ritual, and possibly the honoring of the dead during the darkest season of the year. The midsummer connection, though real, may be a later emphasis. So what do we actually know? Quite a lot, as it turns out, and some of it is almost as strange as the folklore. Construction at Stonehenge began around 3000 BC with the digging of the circular ditch and bank and the creation of what are now called the Aubrey holes. 56 pits arranged in a ring, many of which contain cremated human remains. The large Sarsen Trithyllians were raised around 2500 BC. The blue stones, those smaller musical stones from Wales, were rearranged multiple times over the following centuries, as if the builders couldn't quite decide what they were for. The site was never truly abandoned. Roman objects have been found there, suggesting it remained a place of pilgrimage well into the 1st centuries AD. A decapitated man was buried there during the Saxon period. King Henry VIII acquired the land during the dissolution of the monasteries in the 1540s, and in 1620 the Duke of Buckingham, at the personal request of King James I, undertook the first known excavation, reportedly finding and keeping whatever he found. As for the blue stones producing musical tones when struck, that's not folklore either. Acoustic studies have demonstrated that certain blue stones ring like bells, leading researchers to suggest that Stonehenge may have functioned in part as a sonic instrument, a place not just of vision, but of sound. Stonehenge has never stopped inspiring, from medieval chroniclers to Renaissance painters, from romantic poets to 20th century rock bands, most famously perhaps Spinal Tap's 1984 song, which immortalized a disastrously miniaturized Stonehenge stage prop in one of cinema's most beloved jokes. The monument has a way of making people want to explain it, worship it, or laugh at its inexplicability. The free festival movement of the 1970s and 1980s brought thousands of revelers to the site every summer, until clashes with authorities brought it to an end. Today, English Heritage manages the Solstice gatherings, often providing free access to the monument at midsummer and midwinter, as well as the spring and autumn equinoxes. The stones that were reset using cement in the 1960s have since had that cement replaced with traditional lime mortar, breathable, preserving the native lichen that has colonized the stone over the centuries. Modern pagans and Druids still make the journey. For them, Stonehenge is not a ruin, it is an active place of spiritual significance, proof that some stories don't need to be old to be true. Here's what I find most remarkable about Stonehenge. Almost every legend that was ever told about it contains a fragment of something real. Geoffrey of Monmouth invented a story about Merlin and a memorial for the dead, and the site genuinely was used for burial. The medieval peasants who believed the stone's healing properties were echoing, without knowing it, what the prehistoric builders may themselves have believed when they hauled the blue stones across 200 miles of sea and land. The Druids who gather there today, following a tradition invented in the 18th century, are still doing something that people have done at this site for 5,000 years. Maybe the most honest thing we can say about Stonehenge is this: we built it before we had writing. We may have been trying to explain it ever since. And every explanation, whether it's Merlin's magic, the devil's mischief, or a Neolithic soul encounter, tells the same story underneath. Something happened there that mattered deeply to the people who were here, and we haven't stopped feeling it. What do you think? Was Stonehenge a temple, a monument to the dead, a healing site, or something we still don't have words for? I'd genuinely love to hear your theories in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey into history and legend, please give the video a like. It genuinely helps the channel more than you might think, and subscribe for more stories where the past refuses to stay quiet. Until next time, history remembers, but folklore never forgets.